Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Last time we looked at what the Quran says about abortion, or in particular about the soul, and when the soul enters the body, and we learned that the Quran actually doesn't say very much about that. And Dr. Shabir, I thought it would be worthwhile to now look at the Hadith, which says a bit more about that. So there's one Hadith in particular that refers to the soul. So Dr. Shabir, maybe you can talk about that.
Yes. So the Hadith is related by Ibn Masud, one of the chief companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and so it ranks high in Muslim thinking. But of course, we're not getting it straight from Ibn Masud. Every Hadith, by the very nature of Hadith, is transmitted from one person to another until it gets to be written or recorded in our textbooks of Hadith, or you can say reference books of Hadith. So the Hadith basically says that Ibn Masud is saying that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who is a Sadiq al-Masduq, the truthful one, and whose words are believed or to be believed, said that every one of you is gathered in the womb of his mother for 40 days, and then for another 40 days as a thing that clings, as an alaqa. And then for another 40 days as a chewed lump, or a lump of flesh almost, like a mudgha in Arabic. And then the angel is commanded to write 4 things about this child. The time of the child's death, the amount of provisions the child will have, and whether the child is going to be either, to use the Arabic term, shaqi or sa'id, either miserable or happy. And these are loaded terms because they're mentioned in the Quran as like the final outcome for people. They show up on the Day of Judgment.
Okay.
And some are shaqi and some are sa'id. This is like the gospel equivalent of the separating between the sheep and the goats. So some are going to paradise, some are going to hell. Some are sa'id, they're happy. Some are shaqi, they're miserable because of this final outcome. Nonetheless, to proceed with the Hadith itself, the loadedness of these terms are now explained in the Hadith itself, because the Hadith proceeds to say that there will thus be a person who is doing the deeds of the people of hell. But then, eventually, the writing overtakes this person. Obviously, a reference to what the angel has already written on God's instruction. So the angel has already written, this one is shaqi, miserable, this one is sa'id, this one is happy. So what has been written now overtakes this person. So far, it looked like to everyone, this person is going to hell because he's doing all of the deeds that seem to qualify him for that position. And then suddenly the writing, or eventually the writing overtakes him. Then he does the deeds that will qualify him for paradise, and he dies and enters paradise. Now, the flip side is also true, according to this hadith. There will be a person who is doing the deeds of the people of paradise until eventually the writing overtakes him, and then he does the deeds of the people of hell, and eventually he dies and enters hell. So that's the whole hadith in a nutshell. As you can see, the hadith has many components, and this requires some discussion because it has implications, especially the last part. It has implications for the question of what Muslims refer to as al-qada wal-qadar, to use the Arabic terms, or what we might refer to as predetermination. And this one gives a stark predeterminism. And most Muslims do not accept such a stark predeterminism. You can see where, like let's say, if we have a person who is was doing all of the deeds that would make us think this person is going to the hellfire, and then suddenly this person has a change and this person is going towards paradise. We're all happy about that, and we praise and we thank God, right? Now, if we contemplate the flip side, that this person is doing all of the deeds of the people of paradise, that could be any one of us. We're trying our best to get there. And then eventually something that was written about us overtakes us.
Something that was written about us before we were even born.
Yes. And then that writing overtakes us, and then we start doing the deeds of the people of hell, and then eventually we die and enter hell. So one might wonder, where's the justice in all of this? Where's the fairness? Why is it wise for God to even do this? Why would God do this? Did God actually do this? Are we so controlled so that the person who enters hellfire enters there because this was actually written for them before they were even born? So these are the questions that arise, and most Muslims would find this latter half of the hadith to be problematic. So,
but if they find it's all wrapped up together, right? It's all wrapped up because the understanding of the soul leads to that, right? And that makes it so problematic to have an abortion, because if everything is determined at that stage already, then that means that embryo or fetus is already a person. Right,
yes.
Of course, its fate is already determined.
Yes. Now you could have the first part of the hadith without the last part, without this whole thing about anything being written about this child, especially about the Shaqi and Sa'id, whether the person will be miserable or happy. If we don't have the final outcome prescribed, you could have everything else in this hadith, and that would not be problematic from a theological perspective. But from a theological perspective, to say that the final outcome of this child, whether the child is going to be in heaven or hell, is already prescribed before the child is born, this seems rather theologically problematic. And most Muslims will not accept this part, except with some kind of explanation to avoid this problem.
So do you think if the latter part of the hadith is problematic, that calls into question the whole authenticity of the hadith?
Well, yes, because if we think that the Prophet, peace be upon him, taught precisely everything that's in this hadith, then we have to accept this theological position that the final outcomes of people are prescribed before they're even born. And most Muslims do not accept that. But the other part of the hadith poses a problem from a medical point of view, and also it conflicts with other authentic hadiths on the question on the formation of the fetus. For example, there's another hadith that is recorded in Sahih Muslim. The one we have been referring to so far is in Bukhari. But there's another one in Muslim that is reported by Hudayfa, which says that this happens at the end of a 42-day period. Some variations say 40 or 45, but 42, which is more easily aligned with our medical knowledge. Because medically, to say that the first 40 days, the child is in a liquid state, and then the next 40 days is in this state that is referred to as alaka, and then the next 40 days as a lump of flesh. This seems problematic, because within the first 6 weeks, which would be about 42 days, the child has already developed to a large extent. Of course, so we can see this through ultrasound technology and so on. And we know that now, but people
it's definitely
may
not a liquid state.
And definitely not a liquid state for the first, for 40 days. So the other hadith, which is in Sahih Muslim, this seems more reliable in describing this formation stage. And that hadith in Sahih Muslim does not have this theological problem, because it does not mention the stark predeterminism that we find in the Ibn Masud hadith, which is in Bukhari. But to sum up, I would say that this hadith is the one that gives us the 120-day cutoff period that we've been talking about. So we said that the classical Muslim jurists who allowed for abortions would allow it up until 120 days. After 120 days, they would say no. So some said no from the inception. Some said no after 40 days, but everybody said no after 120 days, except if there was going to be a danger to the life of the mother, and the way to save the mother would be to sacrifice the child. So and now that we can see that the whole discussion about 120 days is actually based on this hadith, which turns out to be problematic from, now we can see three fronts. One, the medical front, because as you rightly pointed out, you can't say for 40 days the child is in a liquid state. And second, it contradicts another known hadith, which is also authentic, which is in Sahih Muslim, saying that it's at the period of 42 days that the angel comes and the child already has all of these things formed. And third, it contains a huge theological issue, which is the stark predeterminism, which most Muslims today will not accept. But our classical Muslim scholars accepted this hadith, and they accepted the stark predeterminism to a certain extent. They would always try to explain it away, but it was always there latent in what they're explaining. And one, is the chicken or egg problem. Like, did this hadith and hadiths give rise to the stark predeterminism that is there in classical Muslim theologies? Or did the classical Muslim theologies generate hadiths like this and attribute them back to the Prophet, peace be upon him? I don't need to settle that now, but it is enough for us to see that the 120 days cutoff time, which is so central to this whole abortion discussion in Islamic terms, is based on a hadith which is problematic. So that gives us some room for negotiating between or beyond the 120 days and to see the possibilities for abortions if there are good and genuine reasons. Otherwise, without good and genuine reasons, we would say that right from the inception, we have a developing child here, and that should not be taken lightly. But more needs to be explained about that.
Dr. Shabir, a big part of this discussion is also about the soul. When does the soul enter, and what is the soul? When does the embryo or fetus become a person? So I think it's worth having that discussion as well. So
Sure.
I think we'll look at that next. Thank you.
Absolutely. Support us today and help us share the message of Islam with people across the globe. Thank you, and may God bless you and your loved ones with the very best always.